Good morning. Good morning, everyone.
Thank you for having me, James. It's so nice to see you.
It is. And thank you, Svetla, for travelling from the States over to sit us.
Such a pleasure being here.
First steps. Why don't we introduce ourselves? I'll go first. I'm James Fernley. I lead the cyber services practice here at Acora. I spent the last 10 years working in industry, and I've bought, built and binned SOCs for the last 10 years. And I'd love to hear from two of the experts who I'm joined with around their perspective on what makes an effective and valuable security operations centre. Simon.
Hi, I'm Simon Crumplin. I've been in the industry since I was 18, so unfortunately that's in excess of 30 years. I sold a number of security practices, and I suppose my desire is to make security a business value as opposed to an investment hole.
Excellent. And hello, my name is Svetla Yankova. I'm the CEO of Citreno, originally coming from Google. I worked on Google Chronicle pretty much since it was a Post-it note, and really kind of happy to talk about the technology aspect of our conversation as well.
I think it stems from how we approach it. You know, when I think about the tenders that we respond to or the customers that we engage with, and we start talking about what a SOC is, we're always bringing it to the lowest common denominator. So this concept of detecting bad and stopping bad and responding to bad. But in my experience and to my operational exposure, we limit the SOC's ability to actually deliver true value back to the organization. It does not understand, in most cases, what the minimum viable business is it's trying to protect. It does not understand its role in its business resilience function. It's a silo of technology speaking in a different language that the business doesn't comprehend. Yeah, do you agree with that, or is that a bit fluffy?
I think so. I mean, from my perspective, we've gotten much better, but somewhat at the wrong problem. We've gotten better at processing stuff, buying more stuff, making more sense of it, getting more and more products to solve a bigger problem. And that's part of the solution. But we've been just kind of applying the same hammer to a bigger and bigger problem in a better way. And we've ignored just a very critical part of the story in our processes and our technology. And as you mentioned, the SOC operating in that silo, both technologically from a process perspective, from a business perspective, is really hurting the organizations, because you're responding to threat actor ABC or family 1, 2, 3. You're not responding to, hey, there's a threat to my crown jewels, right? Like, I understand the risk, I understand the operations. You're just responding to market-driven stimuluses rather than business-driven.
We always use those words, don't we? Context and intimacy, and they are the things which all SOCs lack.
Yeah.
And that's why I think they fail. I think it's an easy thing to observe, right? From the outside. You need context, you need intimacy, you need to understand your business processes. But then, you know, how many organizations have got the capacity and the structure to do that? How many of them are still siloed in IT functions as opposed to being brought up to have those conversations with the business? And I think that's part of the challenge, right?
A really good example of that. So I worked on a project a couple of years ago with a retailer, and it was the first time I'd been exposed to the executive leadership of the board. So the COO and the CFO are sitting in a room, and they are concerned about business resilience, and their biggest concern was ransomware. And it was interesting because it's the first time we could go, well, what makes your business tick? These 6 things. So not the 4,000 servers, these 6 things, these services that are supported by some infrastructure. Well, okay, well, we'll prove whether you can sustain a ransomware attack. Let's explode it. Let's do it. Right, how quick would we get to it? How quick would you detect it? How quick would you be able to contain it? And is that within your risk appetite? And it was wonderful, because actually if I'd asked the CISO or I'd asked the head of IT or the apps director, what are the 6 things that make the difference to your organization, I'd have got 3 different answers.
Yeah.
So getting it from the top was all of a sudden a business engaged conversation where they track, you know, their biggest complaint with us was we were speaking a different language.
Yeah.
So once we got into the business language,
And they're bought into that taxonomy, they got it.
and then we agreed on metrification and said, okay, well, we then exploded, a material attack inside their organization and proved within hours we got the keys to the kingdom, and within a few more hours we were able to terminate their services. We then had the conversation, how would you recover? And actually what that did is drive a program from the business and the executive leadership and change the way they were approaching risk management. Right? And they moved to an evidential model rather than an ethereal model. They spent a lot of money on technology, but it was evidential. We have this problem. Do we still have the problem?
It's grounded in evidence, right? That's what you want, not this theory or fear, uncertainty and doubt, which we see in the industry. It's about how do we prove it, right?
Yeah, and the best bit about it was the most nervous piece, because after we'd finished the program, we'd spent millions of pounds. We were all patting ourselves on the back that we'd done a wonderful job. And then in come Mandiant, the expert red teamer, and you're going, please win. Please don't achieve what we achieved in minutes. And actually 6 weeks later, the feedback from the organisation was everything we did worked. There was more to do, but it became precise rather than general. What that also did, which I think is really important, is stop the continuous purchasing of technology. I need another SASE.
Yeah, that's not a security strategy, is it?
Yeah, I need another thing that's not a SASE because, I think Gartner has huge value, but Gartner says SASE is the next thing or ITDR is the next thing, and we run off as technologists and go and buy something or go and investigate. By anchoring in evidence and proof, you had success criteria and you understood how it fed into the full ecosystem rather than I bought a thing and it solved its problem. But it needs to live in an ecosystem and be operationalized.
Yeah, I think that ecosystem thing's crucial, right? We talk all the time about siloed business operations, and then we talk about this thing called the SOC over here. Svetla, where have you seen, organizations you've worked with, you do this well? What have they learned? Is it the same as Simon? Is it the executive buy-in? Is it getting in front of them? Or is it actually they've spent more time on getting that context and intimacy before they go out to solve the challenge of 24/7, 365, instant response detection, all of that?
So, great question. There's a really interesting pattern in organizations that do this really well. I would call it data curiosity, data hunger, right? Organizations that do this really well, they approach it with sincere interest as to what more can I do. They wake up every morning, they wake up every week, every month and think about a new campaign, not aligned to what vendor A or vendor B says they should do and the fact that there's a product solution to their problems. Yes, there's products as a part of that, but they sincerely are interested in getting the new dashboard, getting their new resiliency metrics, getting their new risk metrics.
Yeah.
Those organizations tend to do really well, and it's really an intrinsic part of who they are.
Yeah, like data's driven as part of an asset as an organization, right? They see the power in it, whereas maybe organizations which aren't born, recently, they don't have that perspective. They don't see it in the same way.
And sometimes they don't have the time to see it because the surface has expanded so much so quickly, right? Security teams are glued by, I would say, acts of heroism within the SOC and auxiliary functions of trying to make sense of through all of it through kind of the human perspective, right? And so when you're inundated by these threats, right? When these threat actors are advancing, when you have a whole new cloud surface to secure, you have 15 new SaaS applications popping up that are business critical, and you have to respond to that. You rarely have the time. So there is an executive alignment that needs to happen. There is a decision to be made about we will not limit our own interest, our own curiosity into modeling what we are, what we do, modeling that within the data and asking better and better questions about it. How can we ask better questions about it?
That's a good point. I think asking the questions to define the use case. Yeah, great point, Svetla. Simon, back to the original question, that exam question of why SOCs fail.
Just building on what Svetla said, because I think that's
curiosity. Yeah.
The curiosity in data. So the evolution of SOC is, and the wonderful evolution of Google coming to market is I now have a data warehouse, a data lake that is bigger than I've ever had before because I don't question what I put in there. I know there's value. Right. The curiosity starts to drive the value.
Yeah, it's interesting actually, isn't it? Because you're typically constrained by ceilings, which are normally dictated by price in traditional SIM platforms, right? And that curiosity is enabled through the way in which Chronicle...
Well, it's interesting because, there's always the challenge of cost versus return. But if you apply curiosity to data curiosity, I like the word, to a SIEM and to a SOC, what's the point? So to me, the SOC sits on the side. It runs a function of detect and respond to many things without knowing which things.
Whack-a-mole, right?
The whack-a-mole word.
Yeah.
You apply context to the environment. Now I understand what things do, which things are the most important, and how I respond to them, because they should be different.
Which mole to whack.
Exactly. And actually, which condition invokes protection, which is quite an interesting concept. If you've got 1,000 servers and suddenly we've got an incident, I want to protect the 7 that make a difference to my organization while I deal with something. But adding to that curiosity, once I have that context, I can start to feed stakeholders with different sets of data. So all of a sudden I become a risk management function rather than
an IT security,
the operations function. I have an opportunity to move up the stack into business applications rather than spending all my time in plumbing, the infrastructure. The business doesn't particularly care about the infrastructure. It cares about the availability of the e-commerce platform to transact a thing. So what we're seeing and what we're driving with our collaboration with Citreno and Svetla is how we move the SIEM and the SOC into this position where it's supporting wider risk management and business resilience. So for me in that, why am I not automating through dashboards and curiosity my audit questions? Why am I not driving governance of IT through that platform?
Because the data's there, right?
Data's there, the curiosity's there with us and in our customer base. So if something wasn't facing the internet and now it is,
do you want to know about that?
I want to know about it and bring it back into the form that I know is good. When you think about, and our industry is led massively by who's the threat actor that's coming at me today, and am I ready for these TTPs? Well, actually, they only need to use advanced techniques if I'm good. If I'm particularly poor, I will just live and execute without needing to try.
Yeah, and it's a pragmatic approach, right? And it's about where do you see yourself as an organisation on that maturity curve? And I would posit that most orgs think they're far better than they are. You know?
But
I don't like we call it the basics. I don't understand that because no one can do it properly.
You've just broken the restriction on budget, which you brought up, which I think is very, very poignant, where, how much more data would cost more money. Well, hold on. Bringing in more data because I'm now serving business resilience, I'm serving compliance, I'm serving audit, I'm serving governance, my third.
Yeah, customer brand trust as well.
But the budget's different, right? Because I've now got different investment routes to drive the value out of this wonderful set of data that we've digested and normalized to use. It's definitely something we talk a lot about.
Yeah, absolutely. And, years ago, we started bringing in the threat data, right, into this process. And it's core part of what the Google strategy is with the work with Mandiant and everything else is, hey, can we come in and bring the threat data, those indicator feeds, all that threat data? And we haven't quite talked about the other bit of the intelligence, the internal intelligence, right? There wasn't a place for that. There wasn't a model of that. There was just events in, events out, maybe some enrichment with threats, right? And I think what you're talking about, it's actually a misconception that this data is even expensive. Context is not that much. It's your number of employees, it's your number of devices, it's your number of applications. It's a very, very, very low volume data with high value. It's just hard to get at it, hard to look at it with the same hammer that we look at events and alerts.
I really like how you position context as internal intelligence there. We talk about threat intelligence, but let's apply our own intelligence, our own knowledge and wisdom about how an organization works.
Which is the business engagement. It is when I'm talking to them about a problem. We built some dashboards for a client, and we represented risk by business function, right? Rather than I had 6 million alarms and 6 million of this and 2 million of that. Actually, I can now tell you that this part of your organization is generating more risk and actually is having more alarms and actually needs some attention from an architectural or management perspective. So all of a sudden the SOC is driving, change in a positive sense against mitigating risk. And you feed that back to a business owner. No business owner wants to generate more risk than the next.
Mm.
So
Competition, a bit of tension, right?
yeah, because we are human, right? We do play against those.
But that is true risk management, right? This area of the organisation is introducing this level of risk. And actually, sometimes the conversation might be, well, that organisation needs to change its working processes. It isn't a technology thing. It's you generate £2 million worth of revenue, but you're introducing £5 million of risk. That's outside of our tolerance. And you start to have some really grown-up conversations then about how businesses are structured and orientated.
The best outcome of that particular representation of data is it drove some questions, curiosity. And all of a sudden it was, okay, so what about in my ERP platform? Oh, but we're not actually in your ERP platform. But that's now the curiosity. Now can we go and do some analysis in the ERP?
Yeah, but we take all your, informational firewall alerts. Is that valuable, Mr. Customer or Mr. Business?
So that gave us the foundation.
It's foundational.
To then go up a level. But when we went up a level, what was interesting then is, interesting to the business was we were looking in the ERP and in a ledger. We're going to the minute we can see a developer in production ledger. That's really interesting to a business leader. That's really concerning. And now we're having proper conversations about the data strategy and the information strategy, not about we've got a SOC. We want a SOC. Actually, we want to deal with some of the things we talk about insider.
Mm-hmm.
But we never quite get to a proper insider conversation. We might do UEBA, we might not get to the thing that is driving the organization's growth, right?
Yeah. I'd like to think that, most people listening to this would be nodding in agreement, but there's the pragmatist in me as well who's lived and breathed this. How do leaders, CISOs, CIOs, whoever it may be, who's ultimately responsible for cyber and information security, how do we think they move from where they are? What's the piece of advice we give? Is it more time in the business, more exposure to the business? When you use that term, internal intelligence and curiosity, is that what needs to inform their strategy more than, like we said at the beginning, the race to the bottom, the cost-saving exercise, that I've got a SOC, it's 24/7, 365, I'm done? Because I can imagine most organisations where we are today, and hopefully you're listening to this, are not going to be what we're talking about as the Nirvana state. They're going to be somewhere in between, right? And I don't know the answer, hence the question. What are some of the pragmatic steps we think leaders can take?
So from my perspective, really good question. From my perspective, leaders are in a really tough spot, right? Because they have the budget constraints to deal with, right? They have to work on these projects. They have the expanding surface to deal with. That said, I think the mind shift is moving from a project point of view to a lifestyle point of view, right? And moving away from we're driving 70 different projects, which unfortunately is the reality. You have to, right? There are these projects that you need to drive, and carving however little capacity you have, 10%, 5%, whatever it is, put a poker in the fire on the lifestyle of kind of continuous information enrichment, right? Looking at how can I get more information tomorrow than I do today? How can I make my analysts and my SOC super aware of my business, whether it's a in-house SOC, whether it's an outside SOC? How can I make them aware of my business, aware of my crown jewels?
And probably vice versa. How does the business become aware of them, right? Because when you said that, it just hit me. It's like, how many SOC operators, analysts, engineers, heads of actually speak to the business? Or are they just over there in IT and in tech? Is it hard to have a conversation? Don't spend an hour with them.
Yeah, I completely agree. But I think that just adding to it, I often come back to what's the practical step I need to take, because back to your point, there's 50 things all running at the same time with a short amount of people, and there's 5 heroes in the business that are holding a number of these things together. And I echo your statement that actually adding context is relatively simple, right? And then hardening that context with the business is really valuable. The example I gave earlier, through that process, we identified they were only backing up 32% of the estate. So actually, by bringing in the context, the business owner of the SOC went back and went, Mr. Business Owner, I'm only backing up these things. Oh, you need to be backing up all of these things. Oh, why? And where do they sit in the tier structure of your asset? So actually, that easy conversation was taking the data we already had and refining it. And now I'm giving that person a report on what's been backed up on a daily basis and what the recoverability of it is.
Yeah.
And what the attacks are. So that's really easy. In my mind, it takes a bit of thought and extending that foundational layer of putting in the data and giving it a why.
And there has to be a willingness, right, from who we work with. So in that example, right, you've got someone who is completely bought into the vision. And, what I see culturally in a lot of security practices is a reluctance to go out and surface some of these challenges because they feel that they'll be vilified for exposing those gaps as opposed to actually being encouraged. Have the difficult conversations now rather than during a breach. You don't want to be doing your 5 whys root cause analysis when you've already been compromised, do you? So, and I think there's certainly a cultural thing what I'd encourage anyone who's listening to this to consider, which is you've got to come out of your comfort zone and come out of where you are as a technologist and an IT practitioner to really go out there and use the data you've got to perform the business.
And reprioritize. Back to the 50 things all really important, which means
what's going to kill us?
Going to kill us.
Yeah.
What's the thing that's going to hurt us? So if I'm applying context in one hand and I'm running a set of assurance, let's start running proper purple teaming. Yes, the red team is always going to win, but when do we lose it or her? So I much prefer purple because at some point the SOC misses. Right? With purple, I have the context with the customer to go, now go after that asset and tell me where you can get to. Go after that service. Thing.
Scenario and goals based a little bit as opposed to here's my pen test.
And tolerance.
And here's my PDF.
Because what is risk tolerance if it's not contextual and understood and actually discussed? Because I think the thing I get, like you, I've got a spreadsheet with 5,000 things that I've got to do this month because risk had told me that every CVE 10 has to be dealt with.
Yeah, or my internal, external auditor said you need to do this thing. How do you take all of those and prioritise them with meaningful context?
Well, context is one path that gives you that priority. The second is exploitability.
Yeah.
We've all spent £1 gazillion on buying technology called defensive depth. We don't apply it against our prioritisation methods. Some people do, but generally it's not. So I'll be going after a CV that's not exploitable because my defense in depth strategy does it. Similarly, a detection in depth strategy tells me something's going wrong. So now, actually, when I start to take the CVEs in, and I start to actually take what was exploitable in, I end up with a very different list.
Much more refined list, right? That's what Kev exists for, as an example.
Yeah, and all of a sudden I'm now sitting there going, I've got these 28 things to do, I'm not going to get to them. If that's a compliance obligation to do business, I need more people.
Yeah.
If this is a business resilience priority of keeping the business operational, is this one you want me to do? Or this one?
Yeah, and it enables you to have that conversation, right? And, I know you hate me for saying this, both when I used to be a customer of yours, Simon, but, it's the defensibility of what you don't do is equally as important as to what you do.
Yeah.
Because, most CISOs, I think nowadays, especially what you've seen recently with a couple of the CISOs in the States, facing off to the SEC and being faced with hefty fines and even potentially prison sentences, there's a lot of pressure on CISOs nowadays. And I think that defensibility of decision-making and prioritization has got to be an outcome of any successful, security strategy, let alone a SOC.
Yep. And once you start speaking the same language with the business, it brings the business in not just budgetary, financially, but it also brings a shared accountability accountability model with application owners, business owners. There's already a shared goal and a shared aspect to this, and it's not just security and vendors kind of working over here trying to make the best out of it.
Yeah,
it's everybody owning the risk together.
Yeah, and
I like that.
I sort of relate that to a conversation we had, James, when you were a customer before you moved to the dark side, actually we were talking about risk tolerance, and you said I had a really interesting conversation with one of the business leaders who said I don't care. What language? I don't care if I'm popped by a nation state actor, if I could stand up in front of the regulatory boards and be confident that we did an appropriately
proportionate.
Because if a nation state wants to attack me, they're going to be successful. I need to make it as hard as possible and not be embarrassed. And I think that gave us an understanding of tolerance, which fed in this instance to what am I susceptible to opportunistic attack? Because I know if I can't deal with that, I'm never going to be dealing with more targeted intrusion. So again, I think that risk tolerance and that business engagement, as we all know, comes. But it has to start with evidence. Running these assessments to prove my susceptibility, whether my prioritization for remediation is correct, applying that against the context to engage, I'm now having a proper conversation, as opposed to I read a thing in the news.
Yeah, and I'm seeing as well, this big debate about compliance doesn't equal security, right? And how compliance goals often are actually disconnected from some of the reality of an organisation. But I think there are some positives there with DORA coming out next year and being enforced across European geographies. There is a mandate now for scenario-based testing in regulation, right? So I appreciate that, they are a little bit behind in terms of the years, but that should also, to my mind, help CISOs, help decision makers in prioritising what we would call, goals-based objective offensive testing to validate security posture, as opposed to going, I'm a 2.8 on a thing, once a year, which is where most organisations are. It's where I was. And the reality is that's a baseline, and you should still use that as a compass to guide you in the right directions. But I think what we're talking about is the precision, right? And it's about the focus.
Yeah, I completely concur. And actually, about how we respond, because I think SOCs are a little bit blind. We've said it so many times, with context, I respond against a set of conditions to protect the organisation. Does that mean I need another control? Well, no, because I can respond and I can prove I can respond to stop this thing affecting my core business. I think we miss the response and the contain function around how we protect the business assets, how we protect the business functions. Back to my retail analogy, sell, pick, pack and ship is their mantra. Right, if I lose treasury, I lose treasury. I can deal with that for a week or a month. But pick, pack and ship, no. So actually, all things are equal.
You can kind of put a number on that as well. We always talk about how hard it is to quantify impact in revenue terms, but it's not hard to go, e-commerce is 50% of revenue, and if it goes down for a week, it's some maths, right? It's a large number. It's probably an embarrassing number if we go back to that language.
Yeah, and actually you get into the proper conversation, which is the resiliency conversation. Are we appropriate? Are we within risk tolerance? Because we can demonstrate the impact. What can we do with what we've got to stop that impact? I think we can all accept we don't perhaps sweat enough out the technology investments we've made, before we go and buy another layer.
Yeah, and I think, what really hit me was that left to right approach we always take. We always start at prevention, stopping initial access, putting all of our controls, our email gateways, our endpoint protection, whatever it might be. It's all about preventing bad coming in, but it isn't about limiting blast radius and impact and improving resilience. I always think about it. You want the left to right and the right to left to happen at the same time. But most security programs and strategy go through this way. They iterate in a single way, and it's like, well, that shows your lack of, to my mind, understanding of what the business really wants, which is they want to, run under duress. They want resilience. They want customer trust, and they probably want to do it for the cheapest price possible, which means not throwing a load of tools at a security program and measuring the success of it on how many of them you got done in the year. That's the change, I think, in mindset.
Yes.
Bit of a shameless plug, but from your guys' perspective, why are Acora different? It's great for us to sit on a podcast and have sage points and talk from afar, but what's your view on how this partnership can help organisations take this forward? I love the piece around data curiosity and encouraging that. I think there's certainly a mindset approach from a CISO base and a CIO base, but what do you think is Acora and Citreno's proposition in this?
So I think for me, one of the learnings I had about 4 or 5 years ago is I was always in a customer out of sync with their strategy. Security was the afterthought. I'm running a transformation program and I'm going to move my core ERP into the cloud. And I will get security involved halfway through the...
Yeah, or towards the end for sign-off.
Yeah, and do an attestation that it is secure.
Yeah.
And, you know, we then work through a process of here's a SAL and here's a service catalogue. Then you sit there and go, so every time they do something, we've got to write a SAL, we've got to do a thing. It's too disjointed. So, you know, the collaboration with Citreno is about being in sync with an organization and flatlining costs.
Yeah, so you want to be able to predict rather than going cap in hand all the time.
And go to subscription, right? You know, if you think about what we're talking about engineering to an outcome that we then assure. Right, so this collaboration says to me, you know, we've done a few of these very recently where we sit with the CIO, we sit with the CEO, or the managing partner. But where are you going in the next couple of years? Well, the big transformation things you're doing. Okay, so we understand your business horizon. Now, how do we get in sync the security flow, but similarly the architectural flow? Because if we architect risk out and we architect, detect, respond, contain, etc. we're in a position where we're in sync and constantly evolving, and it's demonstrable. So I think that the whole purpose of this collaboration is to flatline it commercially and be in sync with an organization to engineer the outcomes. That's how it plays for me. If you disagree, we've got problems about that.
We haven't argued based stuff. So now, for me, my first experience with Simon and with Acora was extremely refreshing and kind of plays to why Acora is different. Because when we were building Chronicle, it was a very economically compelling value proposition. You have a system that was built on Google bare metals with very good economics. And so the lazy way to do it is just go, it's cheaper, right? Yeah. That was somehow the obvious way. And when we met Simon, he didn't go about it with just it's just cheaper. He went about it with, that means more data, right? That means I can do more. That was that intrinsic curiosity that really propagated in the culture going forward, that drives these conversations on a continual basis. How can we do more? How can we do something specific to this sector? How can we do something specific to these customers, these applications, this risk profile? Our customer has to do a manual thing to look at their crown jewels. How do we make it automated? That is the type of discipline that Acora has in their interactions with customers, and that's, I think, the exciting thing about our partnership is driving these forward.
It's kind of like do you want the race to the bottom, which is just cost, or do you want the race to the top, which is your value and your return and how the business perceives what you're doing? And I think, most organizations, they probably flip-flap, depending on what their leadership says. And I think it's about, in each of our, roles, whether or not we're on the consulting side, the customer side, the vendor side, it's about how do we help push that conversation so it's towards value rather than towards a race to the bottom. I think, certainly there will be organizations who are constrained and we've got to consider that. But even with those organizations, it's like, well, let's help you ruthlessly prioritize what you're looking for. We can still make it contextualized.
And be conscious what you're not doing.
Yeah, because back to your conversation, right? That gives you quite a powerful conversation with your executive.
Yeah.
If you're going to constrain me by cost, this is the best I'll be able to deliver you. Mm-hmm. And I'll prove it to you, this is the best I'll be able to deliver to you. If you want more, then that's a commercial conversation, right?
And I find this, we've now been operating in customers for, 3 to 5 months and, following this logic, you start to change the spend profile. So when we were in one particular client, they had a strategy, they were going to spend another 3 or 4 million quid on changing some tools and changing some controls and, buying a new seam. And you go, okay, so you bought some stuff. Are you going to instrument that together? And is it the right stuff? And after conducting that assurance, that purple team activity, applying context when we fed that back to the organization, they changed their spend rate. Well, we don't need one of them because our biggest issue is in recoverability. we don't need to change that. We can sweat that for another 2 years because we're actually going to get control of identity. And that suddenly brought together IT and security in a common outcome because they understood why they were collaborating to achieve something rather than security.
Doing things to identity.
Saying that's
wrong.
Acceptable, it's wrong.
Yeah.
Do that again. And I think that join is actually something that by, the outcome of the engineering and the collaboration is we're now feeding those stakeholders, right?
How do we converge it, right? Rather than we did that, we did the SOC, then we did the NOC, then we did the SNOC, and then wherever we're back to now, and we call it cyber, but it's IT security, right? A lot of it. So it's interesting. I agree. I think the last thing for me as well is, a refreshing approach I heard from one CISO was that they wanted to zero their budget. They wanted to get to their race to the bottom was actually about ratifying what they've already got. And to your point, sweating the assets, architecting out risky business processes, architecting in detection in depth, looking at the controls they truly needed versus the ones they were sold a dream. Yeah. Which again is still valuable to an organisation because you might reduce, your security spend from £2 million to £1 million. It's £1 million worth of cost to the business. And I think again, it's about how do you apply those approaches equally at the same time. So it's not a race to the bottom or a race to the top. It's about sweating what you've got to get the most value. I just want to thank you guys for today. I think it's really, really great. We thank you for your time.